Marisa, your father met Matteo Messina Denaro. What were the circumstances of that meeting?
So it was 1989-90, and he had a problem with someone in Palermo that hadn't paid for some merchandise. So he asked through a friend of Messina Denaro that that if he reached out to a friend of his, and they had a meeting with Torino as well in Calabria, and they said they would sort it. Obviously, my father was then asking for permission because he didn't want it to resort to violence on a Sicilian territory from 'Ndrangheta, which was part of what my father was part of and born into.
And do you believe he was the boss, as it were, in Sicily? Or was there someone above him?
Um, Now I would. He's the old school, isn't he? He's just his name carries so many volumes, you know. Um, just the fear of his name, because he was old school. Of course, you know, you link to the atrocities that were made, the violence, so many victims, which the more modern mafia does not want that, because it's not good for business. Whereas in them days, it didn't really matter, and that's, I suppose, was one of the first downfalls of their actions.
We hear Italian officials, Sicilian officials, saying that this is not the end of the mafia. They will always find a way to survive through evolution or whatever. What would it take? Is it ever possible to eradicate the mafia from Sicily and from the rest of Italy, for that matter?
I don't think so. Personally, I don't think so. Just as when my family was sort of that, you know, everything went down and they went to prison and everyone was arrested, someone else stepped into the area and committed crime. It might not have been a family, you know, it's more of a gang, or just like there is now.
Yeah.
But because they are families and they do come from long lines of this, it's like almost a culture of, you know, it's like a bloodline.
Marisa, let me ask you about the 'Ndrangheta. This is different. This is the mafia in Calabria region, and this is different to the Cosa Nostra, which operates in Sicily, and also the Camorra. What distinguishes them from the other two, and which is the most powerful now?
Well, it's all families that these clans, isn't it? That's the origins of each one. That's so what distinguishes them is not very much other than where they are. So
Yeah.
Calabria, Sicilia, and Napoli. So, but the the 'Ndrangheta now, I would say, has surpassed. I think with the vision that they've had, it's probably a lot more modern as well.
Are they a lot
Than
stronger in the very lucrative drugs trade?
yeah, well, 80% of the cocaine goes through Gioia Tauro, which is in Calabria.
Yeah.
It's a well-known fact that that is happening now.
Your father, Emilio Di Giovane, he was regarded as one of Italy's most notorious mafia godfathers. What was it like to grow up knowing that?
Well, I hadn't actually realised that till I was about 13 years old, but I was obviously growing up with my family on my earlier years. Um, of course, as a child, you don't see all that because they are so nurturing and giving, just like a normal family. So that's what people don't realise. And then, of course, later on in life, it's not necessarily that they want you to proceed in that lifestyle. If anything, my father wanted me to, you know, become a lawyer or a doctor, or you know, but I did go into that lifestyle. Mine was through love, meeting my then husband, my first husband, and he was a soldier in the family. My father actually was very much against it.
Oh,
Uh,
that sounds very much like the meeting between Michael Corleone and his father, Vito Corleone. He says, you know, I wanted something different for you. I wanted you to have a respectable life. So how did you get drawn into it, even though it wasn't your father's plan?
because at the end of the day, it was about loyalty and who they could trust. So I became sort of the money launderer, if you will. So when I say that, money laundering, I took money for merchandise. I took money to be put in the bank, to launder, you know, in activities. So, um, and you think how many people can they trust with that when you've got vast amounts of money in an organization like that, where you literally have a money machine because that's how much there is. You know, it's who do you trust? I used to think, well, why me? I was a very young girl, and but I know part of it was that with my father.
Yeah. It's a very macho life, and you were one of the first women to take over a family after your father was jailed. How did people receive you? Were they respectful?
Of course, yeah, they were respectful. Outsiders of the family were respectful. I carried my father's voice. I'd like to say, you know, when they say I took over, I used to go and visit him in prison in Portugal, get messages. I would give it to each his lieutenants, his soldiers. You know, I would tell them. Of course, logistically, I couldn't always do that, so I had to take responsibilities for certain things that I had to do. So um, thankfully, it was just logistically everyday things, and I had good people around me, which were his soldiers.
Of course, Marita, some of our viewers will be wondering, how is it she's not in prison now, considering what she's just mentioned in this program?
Yeah, well, this happened just nearly 30 years ago, and I did do time in prison. I did 4 years. 2.5 years was in the UK maximum category A prison. With it was HMP Durham with Myra Hindley and Rose West. So it was a hard prison, and then I got extradited to Italy to do a further a year and a half in maximum security prison. So you know, I did do my time, and of course, I have habilitated now, not rehabilitated because I wasn't going to go backwards. Habilitated and into society, and I'm trying to give something back with my criminology degree. I go into prisons, I go into universities, I'm trying to get into schools because I feel a lot of the younger generation, young children, teenagers will listen to someone like myself rather than authority.
It's a final question. It's a famously difficult life to leave. Why did you leave the life? And was it difficult for you?
Um, yeah, of course, I left it. I tried to leave before. As soon as I had my daughter, I realised the seriousness and my involvement. Of course, I couldn't take it back. The deed was already done. So I tried to distance myself, but then as you said, my father got arrested and I had to step back in. But that was done through love and loyalty with myself. It was never about power or anything else like that. Um, and then of course I got arrested a year, 2 years later, and I just thought I don't want this life. I was lucky enough because my mother was English to have another life elsewhere in another country. And of course, now I've turned that around and I've actually become a criminal. I've got my honours degree. I'm a criminologist. I sort of lived one life of that side of being in crime, in a mafia family, and then another life now of seeing things, putting things in perspective of
Yeah.
also why I went down that sort of route. Why, of course, with me was the blood ties, and the way that I was so close to my family.
Well, it's a pretty incredible turnaround. Marisa Merico, thank you so much for your time today on the Nexus. Much
Thank you.
appreciated.